Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ramalinga Center's colloquium series on equity and social determinants of health. We are thrilled today to welcome Shubha Chacko, who, she's been on our list of people to invite for a very long time. This is such an understudied topic. It's not something that at the research level has been investigated a great deal. And I think Shubha is here to shed light on the topic and perhaps encourages some of us to study this very marginalized community. Shubha is the executive director of the Solidarity Foundation, an NGO that supports grassroots level organizations of gender and sexual minorities and sex workers by building collectives, capacities, and connections. Her work experience over the last 3 decades has been varied, but within the realm of development, human rights, and social justice. She has worked with NGOs as well as United Nations research projects and with the National Law School of India University. She is the founder member of the BRICS Feminist Watch and serves as a member of the CSO steering committee for the Beijing Plus 30 process from India. She's been an invited speaker at various international and national conferences and has won numerous awards. I'm not going to go into all of them here, but she has a very lengthy history in the social justice space. Shubha has a master's in social work from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Thank you so much for being here today with us, Shubha, and look forward to hearing what you have to share. One more note here, we will have time for discussion at the end of Shubha's talk. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will try to pick them up for, as part of our conversation after her talk is done. The floor is yours, Shubha. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm truly humbled because I'm not an academic at all. I'm an activist, have been an activist all these years. So I'm going to speak from my experience and the work that we've done. I will start by doing a screen share. Let's hope that we can see. 1 minute. So, okay, so then wanted to start by saying that we're going to talk about an issue that it's very strange. It's extremely visible and it's extremely invisible. So what I mean by that is that if all of us have, seen movies, had media, have had some kind of notions about sex work that we've developed through this kind of, talk. Somebody mentions the word, generally in a certain context. And at the same time, most of us have hardly ever met a sex worker in real life, right? So it's highly visible, hyper visible, and on the other hand, very invisible. So before we move, deeper into this topic, just wanted to do a quick take of, and Radhika is going to help me with this. Just a quick take from all of you to give one word that comes to your mind or you think comes to people's mind. It may not necessarily be you, but what do people generally think of when they hear the word sex worker? Or sex work? What is the first word or, that comes into their mind? Just one word. So Radhika, you can help us with the Mentimeter and we can see what responses come. Just one word, immediate response. And the way we're going to do this is that Radhika is going to stick that link in the chat. She's already done it. So please just go to that link and fill in your word. Just one word. Let's see what. We give you a minute. Please use the Mentimeter. Just click on the link and are people able to click on the link? Okay. So we have many words that have come up. Violence, victim, exploitation, helpless, prostitute, last resort, traffic, poverty, punishment, victim. So it's interesting that our notions of who sex workers are comes from, these kind of words. Let's delve a little more into what their lives are like and what actually is the situation of sex workers. Radhika, if you stop, I can start sharing again. Okay. So yes, so the notions of sex work tend to be around coercion. that many people believe that sex workers are coerced, they don't choose it freely. Our work with sex workers over the many years have shown that the realities are far more complex. Uh, it's not. It's very much that, are they choosing it? Is it coercion? Is not a very simple answer. Most of them who are in sex work in South India do not go into brothels. There are very few brothels here. So most of them have chosen sex work over other informal sector work. Sometimes they have done other informal sector work, like they have done work as domestic workers, they've done work as construction workers, and etc. And then have decided to do sex work, sometimes part time, sometimes full time. And the reason that they do sex work are many. Uh, One is that, yes, for a person with low level of marketable skills, then this is one option which gives you better money than most other options of that, similar kind of, parent, other things that you could get into. There are also issues. There are also issues around you get your money immediately. There's flexibility of timings, and so various other reasons why many women opt for sex work. Uh, is there coercion? There is circumstances which are generally difficult. The sex workers that we work with mostly come from, they have had either, uh, oftentimes, the husband has abandoned them. There's a boyfriend who's missing, or not working, or is getting a very low salary, or there are serious health problems in the family, or they have to send back money home to their parents, etc., etc. So the circumstances are often difficult, and when they get into sex work, uh, very similar to many others who live with this kind of precarious lives. So the issue of choice gets complicated, and the whole debate around choice and agency. So one can't see it as entirely choice, entirely agency, because we'd like to see it in one or the other. We'd like to see them as victims, and I will come to that in a bit. So the next idea is that they're trafficked, that which woman will go into sex work. So the idea that they're trafficked only into sex work is again partially correct and partially incorrect. While some people have been trafficked, many have not been trafficked, and many have come on their own. The trafficking has happened. Two, three things. One is all sex workers are not trafficked, right? So some sex workers are trafficked and some are not. And all trafficking does not happen for sex work. However, as we can see later, the law also tends to conflate the two. So there are some people who are definitely trafficked, no doubt about it. There are many who are not trafficked. So this is again an issue of looking at this as in a more holistic way. And often there are issues of that one must focus on customers to halt the sex trade. That's also an argument that comes up when we're talking about the positions people take. So quickly to before I move on to talk about the positions people take around sex work, it's largely seen either as that they're coerced and then we should rescue them and rehabilitate them, or that they are bad women who have fallen by the wayside and have to be brought back to the correct path. So it's a moral upliftment project that happens sometimes, or that they have to be rescued and rehabilitated because they are all trafficked and they have no agency at all. So all of these discourses frame them only as victims without agency, and it tends to give a lot of power to those who are doing the rescuing. There's a whole what we call a rescue industry that gets set up. It's the police, it's NGOs, it's do-gooders who want to rescue somebody. And that feeds into a certain kind of not just feel good about things, but there's a whole way in which that gets organized. The whole rescue aspect of it. So if we go on to the next, so this has basically been, the aspects of it. There are people who have different positions on it, and I will come to it in a bit. Oh, sorry. I don't know what happened. Why am I going backwards? Okay. So I just want to spend a minute talking to you about the the topic of my, uh, why did I decide this should be the title of my talk? The streets and the sheets. And the idea was that the street, of course, brings to mind people, sex workers often called street walkers. And they do, very often, they do pick up clients on the street. So they are women who are considered off the street. And their place of work is often a public place, that's the street. And so there is a whole association of them in the street. So there is definitely that where they pick up the clients on the street. Of course, things are moving, changing a lot now. Thanks to mobile phones, people are picking up clients online. Street-based sex work is rapidly falling. However, older sex workers who are not so tech savvy, and even, and the poorest of the sex workers, still do a lot of street-based sex work. Um, and then the street is also about public spaces. So, what kind of access do sex workers have to public spaces? And, so for example, it's when I say public spaces, I'm not just saying, I'm talking about in general. So, for example, to give you a thing that if a banker, Mr. Sharma, say, goes to a movie and you see him there and you know he's a banker, but you know him otherwise, you'll say, oh, see, there's Mr. Sharma something, right? If, for a sex worker, it doesn't matter where she goes. If people know she's a sex worker, then the only thing they think of and talk of is that, oh my God, there's a sex worker. You see, so the whole her occupation, because sex work is her occupation, starts to define her identity. It starts to define everything she does. It starts to become a way in which she's not allowed access to many places. So, sex worker going into a park, people are very sure that, oh, she's going to be up to no good, chase her out from there, push her out, etc. So, you can't stand in a bus stop for very long without the police coming and beating you up, because they're sure that you're going to be soliciting, etc. And I'll come to the law in a bit. But basically, so the street in the title represents that. And then, of course, the sheets, of course, represents the sheets on the bed, which is, where sex work happens. So, but it also symbolizes what the police call the rowdy sheets, the sheets that they write up on the crimes. And we know from reality and experience of sex workers that very often many cases are, put around them, framed. They are framed for many kind of crimes, whether they've committed it or not, from vagrancy and, other kinds of things to theft, petty theft to something else, because the police think that these are easy scapegoats. These are people who no one's going to come and defend them. Anyway, they're out of the periphery. They're in the, out of the pale. So why not also do this to them? So that's, of course, one reference to the sheet, and the other is the reference to the sheets in the sense of the newspapers and others on what has been the portrayal in the media about sex workers. Invariably, it is sex racket busted, that kind of thing. So it plays into a lot of the, there's a lot of interest in sex work in that sense, from a more voyeuristic thing of being sensational about it, and, all of it. So this is where the sheets and streets from the title has come in. So let's quickly do an overview of the law and see where we are with that. One is, of course, the Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act, as it's called. It's a very strange thing that, I mean, first of all, I have not figured out in all these years what moral trafficking is supposed to be. But these immoral trafficking is about, I'm sorry, it should read trafficking, not traffic prevention. Sorry for the typo. The immoral trafficking is trafficking, which is it's meant that it is where they're trafficked into sex work. So the construct of sex work is already as something that is immoral, right? And that, so, and the law is a bit strange, because on one hand it says that, that you can do sex work, so you can, you can say you're a sex worker, right? but everything around sex work is criminalized. So you can't solicit. You No adult can live off your wages. You can't solicit in anything called a public place, and the way public space is defined so broadly, you literally can't solicit anywhere, because it can't be near a school, it can't be near a temple or a church or a mosque or a this thing. And in India, if you throw one stone, you're bound to hit two religious places. Okay, don't throw stones at religious places. That's not what I meant. But there's a lot of, there are a lot of, the idea of what is a moral public space is very, very, vague, and it's just impossible for you to solicit, except in a place where nobody is there. Then why would you solicit there? So everything around sex work, you can't run a brothel, you can't, even if two sex workers decide themselves to stake a house on rent and do sex work, they can't. If an older person is allowing younger sex workers to come there and use her house, it's she would be considered as someone who's doing, running a brothel, and she'll be punished for it. So there are lots of things that the ITPA, while sex work per se is not criminalized, everything around sex work is criminalized. Obscenity laws are used because they have very vague notions of what offends public morality, and those can be used in any ways to torment and this thing. Vagrancy laws and other laws are also used against sex workers. There have been some positive uh, judgments that have come out recently, including a recent Supreme Court judgment, which came out about 2 years ago, 2022 it came out, which actually said that many people have misunderstood it and said it has legalized sex work. It hasn't done that. It has said that sex workers have their dignity, and they can, certain things cannot be done to them. For example, the media cannot write about them in a way where they trick them and take their photos and put them out, etc. It says, so media have to be sensitive to them. It says that just because you're a sex worker, you cannot be denied other rights. So you should have access to all your other rights. Uh, those cannot be denied to you. And your dignity and respect has to be maintained because the Constitution guarantees it. That's all it actually said. It just said that sex workers are human beings, literally. But this itself was a very big step to acknowledge that they are sex workers and they have a space that they need in our society. I'll stop now for a moment and let's do our first poll. Yeah, so we've got the results, and let me take a moment to explain the positions various organizations take and our own position on it. So the, the idea, let me take each of it. The idea to criminalize both sex workers and clients has not got, was what the earlier ideas were, to say that what they're doing is immoral, and therefore we should punish both of them. So once we moved away from the morality framework, then most people have, so that was one framework, is a morality framework where people feel that sex work by itself is wrong, and the reason why it's wrong is because it's sex happening outside of marriage, and the only kind of sex that should happen is within marriage. And within that also the various positions, while some people feel that it should only be for procreation purposes, others feel, okay, between husband and wife, heterosexual sex of a certain way is all right. But if you start to take apart the moral, framework, then the another framework that has, so that's the only framework that suggests we punish both clients and sex workers. The other one that says punish the client talks about it from the viewpoint of that it is because there is a demand, it's a demand supply thing. And if you punish the client, then they won't be sex workers anymore. But we've seen in places where the client has been punished, like Sweden, etc., it's only driven sex work into more dangerous kind of situations, because now the client is saying that, listen, if I get caught, I'm going to be punished. So I will pay you less money, or you have to do this, etc., etc. So it's only help to make sex work more dangerous, and for sex workers remove uh, uh, for some of them who then cannot do sex work, remove a source of income for them. So is there exploitation in sex work? Sure, there is exploitation in sex work. But is there exploitation in domestic work? Sure. Now it's 49 rupees an hour, in case you didn't know. So, if so, is there exploitation in the construction work? Sure. So the idea is that people in the informal sector, and the informal sector is very gendered, there is exploitation. And within the feudal time or now in the hyper capitalist kind of world, we are facing a lot of, there is definitely exploitation of workers. But the answer to that then becomes to organize workers. Nowhere is it seen that removing their source of livelihood is generally not helpful unless alternatives are provided where they decide to go for those alternatives, not for us to rescue and rehabilitate. Because that does not work either. And it's a very arrogant position to take that I will go rescue somebody else. If the person is an adult, if the person is a baby, if it's an animal, or in certain emergency, like a house is on fire, then you don't have a discussion saying, do you want to be rescued or not? You just pick up the person and go. But in any other circumstances, there is no need to rescue somebody unless they ask for it, right? But what happens here is when you take the attitude that sex work is wrong, then you tend to want to rescue sex workers irrespective of whether they want to be rescued or not. And that's what the ITPA, etc., does. The ITPA can forcibly put you into a rehabilitation home till you are of sound moral conduct. And that is decided by the magistrate and somebody else. So all agency is removed from you. Even if you say, I don't want to be rescued, you don't have a choice. So there's an infantilization of women in sex work. Um, the next one, of course, is that you say we will legalize sex work and provide licenses. There's a difference between decriminalizing and legalizing. So decriminalizing means remove all the barriers that there are to doing sex work. You don't necessarily need to have a legalized framework where you give license, because what sex workers are saying is the services we're providing, see, doctors need licenses, lawyers need licenses, chartered accountants need licenses. So people like that, somebody can't just get up and say, I'm a doctor and I can cut somebody up. No, you need to go through some studies, you need to go through the process, you need to pass exams, you need to be tested, trained, etc. But sex workers are saying the kind of service we are providing is not something that needs licensing, because like many others in the informal sector, like the domestic worker is not coming with a license, correct? But she knows how to do that work. She has learned how to do that work. So they say we don't need a license. We want decriminalization, not necessarily legalization, which means regulation, which means zoning, which means a lot of other things. But we want decriminalization, and that is what will happen. And the last position, which is recognize it as work within the informal work framework, uh, is the thing that we also take, that it gets recognized. That's the position we take, that it is work in the informal work sector. Like other informal workers, there are some similarities. Like, for example, there's a no clear employer-employee relationship. It is often with the short duration of time. It's, there is vulnerability. There's, no other security. There are health issues. All of this, like many others in the informal sector. It's also exceptional because of the deep, more than anything else, there's a deep stigma attached to sex work. So people don't want to say I'm a sex worker. People are very hidden because of the what we call the violence of this judgmentality. There's a judgmentality that happens, and that is very violent on sex workers. So they cannot state that this is who we are, that this is what we're doing, because they're seen somewhere as women who have taken an, and they're people who take very contradictory, because on one hand people say that this is the easy way out, they want to make easy money, right? But somehow this idea of making easy money doesn't seem to apply to someone who's working in a corporate, who's a software person or something else who's making a lot of money, and you're not saying that's an easy money, right? But here immediately, on one hand people say this is easy money, And on the other hand, they say, oh, but this is very difficult and violent and horrible and terrible and all that. So this is very contradictory, because if it's easy money, then how are you saying it's horrible and, violent and all of that? If you're saying it's violent and all of that, then how are you calling it easy money? So there's a contradiction here that many people seem to hold in their position on sex work. But the position we have held, and based on our work with sex workers, has been that while it's a lot like workers in the informal sector, there are some differences as well. But around the world, the lobbies that are getting quite strong are what is called the anti-trafficking lobby. Often they conflate trafficking with sex work and think all sex workers are trafficked and want to rescue them. No? And it also has a lot to do with first world, third world politics. It has a lot to do with immigration politics, because oftentimes this anti-trafficking is used to prevent women who want to migrate to uh, what is called the first world. So, it's also used within India against women who are, so all the older sex workers are thought of often as traffickers, and the younger ones are thought of as being trafficked. So without any conversation, this can be done because they can decide. We can close the poll. We can stop sharing the poll. I can go back to sharing mine. Yeah, can we close the poll? Can you see my screen?
I have closed the poll, Shubha.
Okay, so fine. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Sorry.
But we're not seeing your screen yet, actually.
You're not seeing my screen? Okay, so let
No.
me. Okay, so I think now you can see it, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so with the state, what do the sex workers do while dealing with the state? They deal with the state um, in various ways. One is that, as I said, this direct threat of trafficking cases that sex workers face, especially older sex workers. The younger ones are taken off for rehabilitation. For both of them, it's very difficult to deal with the police, to deal with, those law enforcement agencies. Even activists like us are at threat of being cases of trafficking being put against us, because they'll say that why are you working with sex workers unless you want to traffic them. So the trafficking law is extremely draconian. It takes the thing of almost guilty until proven innocent, and it kind of pushes you in a certain direction. So many sex workers then, so the contradiction is that you have a trafficking case against you, and then you have to pay off lawyers, you have to pay bail, you have to pay off the cops, etc. So you have to do more sex work in order to pay off uh, all of this. And so it's also contradictory, because the ITPA says that no adult can live off the wages of a sex worker, but here the state is living off the money that the sex worker is making, right? So this law that is supposed to protect her is actually landing up with her having to make more money to pay off, and the state is actually, now becoming the direct exploiter of the sex worker. The other thing that has happened with sex workers, as you said, is that they have to negotiate with various arms of the state. For example, there is HIV funding which has come in for sex workers, because, and if you see below, in terms of how they get identified, is that they get identified as high risk group. So it says that HIV is spread through them. They're more at risk of HIV, which is true. They're more at risk of HIV because they have multiple partners. But rather than often, so there are programs that are designed for them. But those programs, basically, the notion was that we have to protect. So the idea of calling them high risk group was that society and the good people are at risk because of the sex workers. So we have to protect society. And therefore, the suggestions were that they use condoms, etc. And then there were condom distribution mechanisms to do that. HIV prevention had its positives of bringing sex workers together. Some work with them started happening. Some health issues started getting addressed, etc. However, it was very limited, and now the money for it has come down substantially. And it is very limited because it only sees, only one aspect, which is HIV prevention. It doesn't talk about anything else. In fact, the joke we have amongst the group, amongst our circles, is that if somebody came to you all beaten and bruised, you say, "Oh, I'm so sorry about that, but here's a condom," because all the HIV project could do was to say, "Here's a condom." So that's how the state has looked at it. And as I said, rehabilitation was the other thing, where you had to say that you will give up sex work, then you can get any benefit from rehabilitation. And the rehabilitation schemes have all been disastrous, to say the least. They've been ill thought through. I mean, they've been ill conceived. Implementation is terrible. Lots and lots of issues. I won't go into them, but just to tell you. So the thing also therefore becomes that how do sex workers identify themselves? So they often also say that they're victims because they feel that's the only way they will get acceptance. So they will tell you some dukh bhari kahani that, this happened, that happened, what to do, madam, now I'm like this. Because they feel that if I tell you that, yeah, I looked at various things and I decided, okay, this is one option for me. Then I do it part-time, I do it sometime, whatever. Then you may not give them some sympathy, you may not give them any respect, etc. So at least if they say we're victims, you might give them sympathy. So that's how often sex workers share stories of being, victims and, you know, feel sad about what's happening to them. Okay, we'll pause here for a minute and we'll do our next. Okay, I think everyone's voted. We can end the poll, I think. Yeah, so with unionizing, because what has happened was that while definitely we also feel that the only way for any marginalized community to get their rights is to come together as a collective, and including for sex workers. But the challenges they face are many, because first of all, it's criminalized. Right, so you can't, very difficult. We couldn't get the sex workers union registered because they're saying, how can you register an organization for something illegal? Though technically, uh, sex work is not illegal. This is how it gets framed. Second thing, the problem is that there's a tension between anonymity and visibility. So if you want to build a union, you need to come together, you need to be visible, you need to shout out for your rights, you need to take to those streets. Remember, I spoke to you about the streets and those sheets. You need to get to those streets and you need to change the narrative on those sheets. So if you need to do all of that, you need to be visible. But in sex work, you don't want to be visible because of the stigma that is attached to what will happen with your family, what will your children say, what will your with somebody else say, what the police will pick you up tomorrow because you've come out openly as a sex worker, etc. And your clients also. If you're known as a sex worker, you get less clients. If you're seen as a decent woman and you can pass as a decent woman, then there's a better chance of you being able to get clients. So then, therefore, sex workers do not want to be very visible. Yeah, so that's the tension we have around unionizing. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so what is their realities? As I said, because of the social stigma, it impacts on them terribly. So oftentimes they have to, it impacts at many levels. Let's say at the level of their personal lives. They often are living double lives. They often have to be constantly worried and scared who will find out, who will get to know, and not feeling confident to call for help if they're in a difficult situation, because you might have to reveal that I went with the client and you are scared of that. So you keep hiding that part of it. You keep having to live double lives. You have to for example, many sex workers use two SIM cards, one for their sex work, one for other things. You have to, many sex workers dress a certain way at home, go to a friend's house, where it's safe, and change their clothes and then go out. They have to come back and change again and come home. So many things that we take for granted, sex workers are constantly having to navigate that, right? So that takes a personal toll on you. Therefore, mental health issues are very high, mental health challenges are very high, because also society is telling you you're horrible, you're terrible, what you're doing is dirty, what you're doing is vile, what you're doing is a sin. So you start to, internalize that, and there's a lot of internal stigma. And therefore, there's a lot low self-esteem issues. There are issues around substance use, the higher rates of people taking their own lives, etc., in the sex worker community. And now I want to just take a minute to say, when we're saying sex workers, most of us only think of women sex workers, but there are trans and male sex workers as well. So while we have female sex workers, we have, the percentage are more of female sex workers for sure, but we also have trans people. Many trans women do sex work, and many there are men also who do sex work. Many of the men who do sex work service other men, but a few of them now in a few places have started servicing women, because as women get more money and more income and more like a place of their own and other kinds of they move, access to other kinds of resources. They also have been men who are servicing women. So sex workers are not only female. They're a little different. And of course, they come from different geographies, different backgrounds, different class. Won't get into all of it. But the social stigma is one. They lived experiences that often they have to change homes very often, because somebody will get to know that they're a sex worker, etc. They'll have to move homes. Often there are problems with their children getting admission in school, because either the father's name is not known, or sometimes they have another partner now, and that name is not reflected in the ration card. So there are issues that come up there. There are also issues that if the school gets to know that they're children of sex workers, other children, taunt and tease and bully and say horrible things to the children of sex workers. And also sometimes, I mean, we've had multiple instances where the teacher or the principal has called the sex worker and tried to sexually abuse her, thinking that how can a sex worker be sexually abused? Because this is also what police talk about, that anyway you're a sex worker, anyway you go to so many men, so what does it matter one man more? So the whole idea of choice, agency, etc., removed from her completely, and you thinking of her only in terms of, like that if you're a sex worker. So the idea is again in the moral and the binary framework of that sex should happen in a heterosexual marriage only, and anyone who's not doing that, anyone who's breaking that, is kind of free for all. So of course, this police violence. Violence can be from neighbors, it can be from general public, it can be from clients, it can be from partners, intimate partners. It, all of these sides of violence. The sex workers face a lot of violence, including now with the digital. There's a lot of blackmail issues. There are issues of, putting out their photos without their consent, sharing other kinds of details about them, widely, because we can share information so easily. So all of these are some of the things that happen around, sex work in terms of the violence and this thing that they face. So as I said, that I spoke to you this tension between visibility and anonymity, wherein sex work, actually anonymity is prized, and then, but if you want to get organized, you want your rights, you have to be visible. There are difficulties of organizing them, because oftentimes when there is police violence, they get dispersed, they move away, etc. And there are also challenges to access social entitlements, because they move home so constantly. And some of these benefits that the government gives out are just, excuse me for 30 seconds. some of the benefits that the government gives out, you have to come and declare that you're a sex worker to get it. And sex workers are scared that then if people, they declare it and then people come back to your house and check and inform somebody. So many of them don't take these benefits. So because most sex workers in this part of the country are hidden sex workers. So they don't want anyone to come to their homes and check and tell them. So then they don't get access to a lot of social entitlements, which they're supposed to. Let's just quickly touch on the health issues. I told you that the the toll that this thing takes is that, mental health challenges become huge. Uh, there was a sex worker who told me how once she went to, she was pregnant and she went to a hospital and the doctor there knew she was a sex worker. And soon as he came, he said, "Oh, but of course you'll want an abortion and you should have an abortion." And he kept pushing her, whereas she actually wanted to have the baby. So, she didn't want an abortion. So the whole thing of how you're viewed. Another person told us about how when she went to the doctor because she had an STI, then she couldn't tell him that she was a sex worker. Then he told her that, you should do this, you should tell your partner not to do this, you shouldn't have sex for so many days, etc. And she was thinking, but then how, but I'm a sex worker and what will I do for those many days? How will I earn my money? And she couldn't tell him that she was a sex worker because she's very scared of what kind of response she'll get to him, get from him. So there are multiple barriers in actually accessing non-judgmental, positive healthcare facilities. Uh, yeah, so as I mentioned some of this, and doctors, I mean, we've heard of cases of doctors when they realize that the person is a sex worker, they don't want to even touch them, they don't want to go near them, you know. So, or they start lecturing them, saying, "Give up these bad ways. What are you doing? Come back, you know, when you're feeling better. I mean, when you move to a better life, etc." So, these are some of the challenges and concerns that they face on a day-to-day basis. Uh, I'll end with just talking about, if you're researching sex workers, because people do come up and say we want to research sex workers, but often we have to start by looking at some of the ethical considerations. Are we going to be putting them more in danger? Are we going to be exposing them in some way? What are the kind of confidentiality measures we're taking in place, etc.? We have to understand, as I said, positionality and power dynamics. Like, what is our position? Are we, doing this with them from a viewpoint of knowing it all, that we've come to tell you? Is there a way that we're thinking of co-creating the research with them? What is the kind of lines we take on that? Are we able to listen, learn, change, be open, and not just see ourselves as experts, and understand that they are experts of their lived realities? Can we look at it like that? And as I said, there are legal aspects to it because of this whole thing that tomorrow, if I said that someone is a sex worker and doing it and whatever, what becomes the ramifications of that? And the safety is also that if we, what might happen to her if we're asking questions in her house and her partner over here, so her children over here, what are we doing to protect, that? And, so we have to therefore approach the issue. We yes, it's an under researched topic, but at the same time, we have to approach the research from with certain sensibility and understanding and and respect that they deserve, that the sex workers deserve. And this is besides, of course, the other things of how are we deciding topic? Is it of any use to the sex workers themselves? Or are we choosing something that we want to do? How are sex workers going to use that later, etc.? So, is there more, ways in which we can sit and get the information where it's a more equal kind of relationship, where we're co-creating it and it's not just an attractive kind of research that we're doing? So, can it be more tethered on feminist principles? can that be some ways in which we explore this issue along with people who work with sex workers, along with the sex workers themselves? Is that possible? So that this research then becomes useful on the ground, and doesn't remain just in academic papers. While of course writing papers and expanding the thinking around this issue is very important, but it's also important that the sex workers are kept at the center of this. And I mean, and that's the thing I think we should take as a non-negotiable. That if we're doing this, we're doing research with them, then where is the voice of the sex worker? Where is their inputs, etc. So I will end with that. Just want to say, by the way, that one of the sex workers that we have worked with has turned out to have, is a person who has very good research skills, and she's helped with one or two other research studies as well. So she's got, she's a good researcher. So also, to understand that yes, they're sex workers, but many sex workers have other skills, and sex work is something that is complex. So I'll end now for and I'll be happy to hear from people whether there are questions. I have not checked the chat, but
No.
uh,
Oh, that was, no, we do have questions now, but I'll pick them up and bring them up for discussion now.
sure.
Okay. Thank you, Shubha. That was, unpacking a very complex topic, and it's not often easy to find this kind of non-judgmental information around the sex worker community. And I think you've laid out the scenario really well, showed the complexity of both the community and their problems in a way that we don't always see. So thank you for this. I think, in some ways, it's still a sort of a preliminary talk. I feel like there's so much more to explore in each of these topics that you brought up. I'll sort of summarize some of the questions, and I encourage people to write in more as well. A couple of the first questions are actually broad questions about beyond HIV or beyond STDs. What else, what other health concerns do you see in the sex worker community?
So one, as I said, is that there are significant challenges around mental health because of what I mentioned, the stigma and things like that they have, that they have to face, substance use because of also this and other lifestyle related issues, and so and then I think, of course, STDs, STIs as we call them, the infections, not. So there's STIs, there's HIV, of course. There are also issues around, depending on the kind of sex work that people do. If they're standing on the street for a long time, walking up and down, etc., then there are issues around their legs and, getting, that kind of thing of that, or dehydration or whatever, which is common to any any informal worker who's standing on the road for a long time. But other than that, those kind of things, and that depends, as I said, on their particular thing. These are some of the particular challenges that they do face, and barriers in accessing healthcare.
There's several questions about, what is next in the fight for rights for workers. So, for instance, one person asks, have the movements of informal workers and sex workers, have they come together over time? Has there been some sort of understanding or between them, or are there such dynamics can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's very interesting because we're actually doing a study which is looking at we started by looking at violence in public space, and then we moved it to look at women workers for whom the street is a place of work. And we've looked at 4 different kinds of women. We've looked at street vendors, vegetable vendors, street vendors. We've looked at waste workers. We've looked at sanitation workers or karmikas, and we looked at workers to understand what this is about. And part of that was also to bring them together. And it is not easy. It's not a natural kind of thing that because they're in the normal sector, they will just come together. Because there are issues of, like the sex workers often said, we don't want to say we're sex workers in front of them because one woman said, I also do street vending. So if I, some of the days I do street vending, or half a day I do street vending, or when you don't have a client, I do street vending. So I'm doing both. So if I come out as a sex worker, then I don't know how the street vendors will see me going forward. The other issue has been people have been talking about how, you know, I don't want to say because I don't know whether they'll judge me, for what the work that I do. So there's been a lot of this kind of issues that have come up. However, having said that, we've had conversations and slowly some kind of understanding has emerged among different groups, or with the different groups that we've interacted. We also did a coming together on under the broad rubric of body politics, where we brought Dalit women, Muslim women, women with disability, and uh, sex workers and the gender sexual minority communities, all from the grassroots. And there also the conversations over time, people started appreciating each other's situation. So, I mean, this is something I love doing, the dialogues across movements, but it's not, we have to understand that that's going to be difficult, and it's difficult on both sides because the sex workers also harbor sometimes, prejudice other groups. It's not only one way. But those are the difficult conversations where we move out of our comfort zone that I think is very important, especially in this day and age when the pushes are to divide us, are to talk about our, what is different about us. So, when we are trying to have those conversations and bridge it, I think that's a political project of that is very relevant today.
Excellent. What a complex question, actually, and it's very hard to answer, I think, as you said. Are there, Savita asked, I think a question along the same lines. You were pointing out how a lot of the government programs are very, have this very moralizing kind of stance to them, that they need to be rescued. So she asks, what kinds of rehabilitation solutions can be offered? And do you know of any good government programs that actually do this well?
Unfortunately, no. Most of the government programs are very short-term idea to rehabilitate. And they teach them something. First of all, they are put in that home for a long time, which is worse than jail, those so-called rehabilitation homes, and those state-run homes. And they also are taught some, making candles or something over, and then asked to go back and fend with so-called skill that they've learned. And people seem to forget many things. That one is that has no sustainability, etc. We have done some things where we have where sex workers, we put them through a livelihood project, and some of them, about 25 of them, have started their own little enterprise. And but we are not saying you give up sex work and do this or whatever. Some of them have decided to give up sex work. Some of them are doing it along with sex work. Some of them are using this to actually bolster their both things. For example, one woman is running a bangle shop, and there a lot of young sex workers also hang out waiting for their clients because it's a safe space for them because she's an older sex worker. And she's also able to then do the negotiation, bring in clients, etc. So she's doing it both as a ruse to sex work, and she's also selling bangles. So there are people like that, and the people who've said, no, I don't want to do sex work anymore. I'll do this completely. So for us, it is, they have to decide. Who am I to say that you should be rescued? And that whole thing around the morality and whatever which people are talking about, it's, how do we decide what is moral, immoral? Because see, we if you look at why people have sex, even within a marriage, when we analyzed it, we find that people have sex for multiple reasons. Like one woman was saying, before I want to go to my mother's house, I definitely have sex with my husband so that he'll say, okay, tomorrow you go. I need to get permission. So there's a negotiation happening there, right? You want to go to your mother's house, you want to get that permission from your husband, and you feel, okay, I give him sex, he'll give me that permission. Right? So somebody else said that I have to have sex with him because otherwise he may go off to somebody else. So I'll feel insecure. So I don't want to have. so even if I don't want to, I feel I should have sex with him. So we realize that people have sex for multiple reasons, even within a heterosexual married kind of situation. Hmm? So, so then when you take it, actually, then you realize that sex work is not so exceptional. Same way you go for a massage, somebody's touching your body, doing this, doing that, you feel relaxed, you feel nice, and you're paying money for it. That's not considered immoral. They're touching you all over your body. The minute it goes into just the next one different level, a little different, then it becomes a moral issue. So I think this need to unpack the moral and accept that it's a moral judgment, that the only reason why people feel that sex work should be criminalized is something that you know we should talk about.
Mhm. Well, I think, Aishwarya's question is a good follow-up to this. She says, considering recent judicial pronouncements and debates around decriminalization versus legalization, she asks, how best can one do research that captures, the rights and agency, and maintains the rights and agency of sex workers without reinforcing victim narratives?
So I think there are many ways. For example, we've done some research. Like recently we brought out a little booklet where we had three long interviews with sex workers. And then we knitted those three stories into one. And it showed their lives and their complexity. See, what we're saying, we're not saying that they live marvelous, glorious lives, but at the same time, we're saying that, oh, it's not like, yo, papa, poor things, they're struggling day and night, no joy in their life, etc. So we're saying it's a complex things of love, of frustration, of boredom, of thought, of feeling. So all of that is there. And if we're patient and listen to it and we're able to capture those narratives like that, then we can show that their lives are as complex as it is, and then look at some of the issues that are emerging, like for them, like there's a whole lot of things about what happens to older sex workers, aging and sex work, because oftentimes their relationship with the children gets very complicated. Often it is for the children's sake that women go into sex work, saying, I need to feed my child, I need to send my child to school, so I need to do this for my child. And then when the child finds out, the children often turn against the mother, or put them out to do things like that. So, so there's also complex things about how aging and sex work is a complex issue that, one can study.
I feel like the short answer to every question is that it's really complex, right? I feel I've been repeating this over and over again. I feel like I need some new language here. But I think the point that you made about how family itself can be complex for sex workers makes sense. We can link it to Vidalini's question here. She asks, can you tell us something about sex workers' support systems, given that they have poor access to institutions and services? What are their notions of agency and empowerment, and do they see women in so-called stable marriages and homes as leading? How do they view typically married women? Perhaps do they view them as leading restricted and disempowered lives, or how do they view them?
No, I mean, I think it's complex again. It's their support system is often each other, because they feel that we can't talk to anyone else about what we're going through. People won't understand what we're going through. Many of them have formed collectives which support, so through the collective, they get collectives which is supported by NGOs or somebody, and that is also a source of strength for them. Sometimes they do have sympathetic others, like the sympathetic auto rickshaw drivers, or there's a sympathetic lodge owner, or so in those stakeholders that they work with, there are some of them who are sympathetic and supportive to that extent. Sometimes the family knows and doesn't know and is sympathetic. Sometimes the family doesn't know and is supportive, because oftentimes she's sending a lot of money, and then they say that, okay, so then they're willing to help her in some ways. Not She can't talk about the issue she's having around sex work, but she can talk about some other things, get some practical support, like, will you look after my child? So there's a lot in the community itself. There's a lot of care, collective care that happens, where people are leaving their children with each other, people are taking each other to the hospital, and things like that. So that's a whole area to investigate. Like, what is the support system? How do they use it? What is this notion of collective care that they practice? And I think it's an important thing, especially because there's a lot of talk of self-care now, very driven by market kind of language, of the idea of self-care. So to unpack that, and then how do they see women who are married? No, they aspire for that. They feel that patriarchy is there in all of us. Yeah, you can be a sex worker, but you can be. So they feel, that's why that they feel also that they should have a partner. And often they face a lot of violence from the partner, but they feel two, three things. One is that they feel, I need the partner because otherwise everyone in the slum will start targeting me, come for me, etc. At least here there's one man, so the other men get a signal that I'm taken and they can't come for me. So that's one thing. So he's like a protector. The second thing they feel is, but at least we need someone for our talibut too, So we need somebody to give us that. And they feel that they should serve him and do this. And then the third thing why they stay, even if he's very violent, often is because they feel that who will be, I'm a sex worker, who will be with me, At least this person, in times when sometimes the partner knows, like he's a former client and then he becomes a partner. So oftentimes, they have, they're more, they have more power when they're with the client than when they're with the partner. So they can, for example, negotiate condom use better with the client, saying go to hell otherwise, but with the partner, they're often unable to do it. So it seems contradictory. You think with a partner with whom you have an intimate relationship, you can negotiate better than some stranger, but oftentimes it's the other way around.
Yeah. Another attendee asks if you can speak a little more about male sex workers, about their concerns. Are they similar to those of female sex workers? Or what is the solidarity in their community? Those kinds of issues. I think that's relatively less known about that group. Right?
Yeah. So the male sex workers, many of them identify as within the gender sexual minority community. Many of them are part of that community. They identify use various indigenous terms like koti, etc., to identify themselves. And then they, it's the people who who seek their services out are men who are considered as what considered typical man. So they have issues of oftentimes that they have some issues around mobility. I mean, they don't have so many issues around mobility because as they're seen as men, even if they may feel may not fall into the box of being man. They may see themselves as different, as not fitting into that, gender non-binary. They may see themselves as different. But they nevertheless have greater mobility than female sex workers, because of the way society views them. And oftentimes when they also, some of the men you would choose to go to them for various reasons. Some of them are attracted to, would want to have sex with the man. Some others also feel that, if I take a man home or if I take a man somewhere else, then no one will think that we have a sexual relationship. But if I take some woman and go somewhere, then it's very clear that I'm having a sexual relationship with her. So in some senses, they can get, this thing. But oftentimes, their identity as sex workers is sort of muted, and their identity as a member of the gender sexual minority is more put up. But they also face a lot of violence and a lot of, the thing of blackmail is very often a thing that people record them like they do with female sex workers and threaten to leak it unless they either pay money or they give them free sex, or, they make various demands out of them. They also are again scared of being caught. They're scared of talking about it. And then also STIs and getting tested is also something they're scared to go and talk about this to the doctor because, because with the female sex workers, she can say that often female sex workers don't have anal sex. So they can then say, my husband did this to me. With male sex workers, if they have anal sex or if there is any other thing, how do they explain it to the doctor? because you have to say you had sex with another man. So there are those kind of issues that many of them, therefore, don't seek medical help.
I mean, in some ways, their lives are more invisibilized, and in some ways, their lives are the
Correct.
opposite as well.
And oftentimes there isn't, only in a few places, there's solidarity links built between female sex workers and male sex workers. And of course, we have trans sex workers who have another set of issues because they are again highly visible, and they face violence from police, from goons, etc. Another thing that often happens to all sex workers is that one person with a mobile phone, one person will fix up to meet them, so then they go there and then 5 others land up. So they've negotiated only with one person, correct? And then when they go to that spot, that person then calls 4 or 5 others and says, I'm here, so come. So then they have 4 or 5 people there, and then it's very dangerous kind of situation sometimes.
Okay, all right. Savita asks, what is the prevalence of use of tobacco and other forms of tobacco products? This seems like a very specific question, I guess, based on her interests. But perhaps you can talk a little bit more. We can broaden the question to ask about their use of addictive substances, perhaps.
Yeah, they many of them use alcohol quite a lot. Tobacco to some extent. Not so much smoking, but chewing tobacco.
Chewing tobacco. Okay.
And so that's more prevalent. And some of them smoke, but many of them drink alcohol. And it's also oftentimes that the client will buy you alcohol and all of that as part of the thing of build up towards going on to have sex.
Okay. Well, I think we have one more question, and this seems like a good one to end the discussion on as well, which is Swati asks, what is the next step in the fight for the rights of sex workers?
I think the first thing will be to decriminalize, and so that before we move forward, if this criminalization is happening, then it's very difficult to get your other rights, because constantly you can't unionize, you can't do this, you can't do that because of that. So I think the first step is the decriminalization, and then on to get them linked with other the thing. Because we have, you want to see recognition like with other informal workers, get a convention, get other kinds of laws that protect you, offer you some minimum insurance, some safety, some social security, like a pension parishad, which is talking about pensions for everybody. So all of those will come only after it's decriminalized.
Okay, I
But
think
that
that's
is the first step. I
and
just
doing it
wanted
without
to
this moralizing around
correct. I just
their
wanted to
activities.
add one point. I wanted to add one point to conclude, is to say that clients have very complex relationships also with the sex workers. People see clients as only one type. So some of them are very violent, but some of them are very nice, very caring of sex workers. There have been instances where a sex worker was upset with her partner and she burnt herself up and she was in hospital, and many clients gave her money. Even though they knew that she's going to be very ill, they were not sure whether she'll survive. They may never have sex with her again, but they did feel some connection and they did give her money. Then there are also people who have very different kinds of relationship with sex workers. There was one person who said that all he wanted to do with the sex worker was sit and have a couple of drinks with her, because he said, in my community, women don't drink, and I like this idea of sitting and having a drink with a woman, and so he just wanted to sit and have a drink with her. So I just wanted to say that the relationship is complex. Some of them it's violent, it's horrible, it's terrible. With some of them it's tender, it's quite sweet, it's quite nice. And with some of them it's okay, they come, they whatever, and happens and goes. So it's as complex as any, with most other relationships.
Human relationships.
Yeah. So I just wanted to end on that, because we all tend to have one notion of the client. So
yeah. Well, thank you, Shubha. This was so illuminating. It was such a thoughtful and nuanced picture of a community that I think we tend to see very simplified or simplistic versions of them, in the media. And I think this was very helpful to think about their needs. I mean, the risks that they face, the needs that they have, the same kind of attention that we give to other vulnerable communities as well. So I appreciate the time that you've spent with us today, and thank you for answering all of the questions that came in the chat box, and hope to continue the conversation in another context.
Thank you, Abba. Bye-bye.